Hello, 7th grade. This is lesson 15. Our objective is how do you find equivalent fractions and how do you reduce fractions? So first of all, let's just look at these pictures. I actually copied and pasted them. This first one here is I've taken a circle and divided it into two halves, and I've colored in one of those two halves. So one of the two is colored in. Now this one here, I've taken and I've cut that in half. So now there's 1, 2, 3, 4 sections, but notice again, still just two of those four are colored in. So notice the same amount of colored in here as here, but it's two of the four, 2, 4. Here I've cut this into 6 pieces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 3 of those 6 are colored in, 3/6. And here I cut into 8 pieces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And 4 of those 8 pieces are colored in. But notice it's the same amount colored in for all 4 of these. So 1/2, 2/4, 3/6, and 4/8 are all what we call equivalent fractions because they have the same value. They all have the same value. Now, before we move on, we need to remember something, that any number divided by itself is 1, as long as that number is not 0. So any number divided by itself is 1. So for instance, if you took 5 and divided it by 5, you would get 1. If you did 13 divided by 13, you'd get 1. 4 divided by 4, 1. 2 divided by 2, 1. So we need to remember that because it says form 3 equivalent fractions for 3/4 by multiplying by 5/5, 7/7, and 3/3. So let's see here. So notice I'm going to take this 3/4, that's what I want to be equivalent to. I'm going to multiply it by 5/5. Now what we just talked about was that 5/5 is actually just a fancy 1. So I'm saying 3/4 times 1 would still just be 3/4. I'm just going to change the way it looks. So on the top, I'm going to say 3 times 5, which is 15, over 4 times 5, which is 20. So that's my first one of use that 5/5. Next, I'm going to say 3/4 times 7/7. Again, that 7/7 is just a 1. So 3 times 7, that's 21 over 28. That's an equivalent fraction to 3/4. And then one more, I'm going to say that 3/4 times 1, but this one I'm going to pick as 3/3. It's going to be 9/12. So those are 3 equivalent fractions to 3/4 by using that 5/5, 7/7, and 3/3. Now, this one here says find an equivalent fraction for 3/4 that has a denominator of 16. So what I'm thinking about is I want this to be 3/4. I'm going to multiply it by something over something, and I want it to equal to something over 16. So what I need to think about is 4 times what is going to give me 16? Well, I'm remembering that 4 times 4 will give me 16. I want this number to be 1, so it'll be the same, right? 4/4 is 1. So 4 times 4 give me 16. If I multiply the top by the same thing, that'll give me that new numerator there. So 3 times 4 is 12. So 12 over 16 is an equivalent fraction to 3/4 and has a denominator of 16. Here for part C and D, it says find the number that makes the two fractions equivalent. So I'm going to think about here is I'm going to say 5 times what is going to give me 20. Well, I know 5 times 4 gives me 20. So I'm going to do the same thing on the top. 4 times 4. So then 4 times 4 is 16, so this is going to be 16 over 20. It's the same thing as 4/5. Here, I'm going to think about the same thing. 3 times what gives me 9? Well, 3 times 3. So I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom. So that means this is going to be 9 over 24. Okay. Now part E says find a fraction equivalent to 3/5 that has a denominator of 10. Let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to say 3/5, multiply it by something, and I want the denominator to be 10. So I'm going to think 5 times what will give me 10? 5 times 2 will give me 10. I'll put the same thing on the top and the bottom. So 3 times 2 on the top is 6. So 3 over 5 is the same thing as 6 over 10. Next, find a fraction equivalent to 1/2 with a denominator of 10. So I'm going to do something similar. Equivalent to 1/2 multiplied by something over itself as a denominator of 10. So 2 times what gives me 10? Well, 5. So 1 times 5 on the top gives me 5. Okay. And then it says, then subtract the second fraction you found from the first. So I need to say the red one minus the blue one. So 6 over 10 minus 5 over 10. Remember, to add or subtract, the denominators have to be the same. So 6 minus 5 is 1. So my answer is going to be 1/10. All right, the next thing they asked us to do is to reduce. And to reduce a fraction is kind of going the other way of what we just did. We're wanting those fractions to not have any common multiples in the top or the bottom. So what we're going to do is, instead of multiplying the top and the bottom by something, we're going to divide the top and the bottom by the same number. So I'm going to look, 3 and 6, I think those both have a factor of 3. So I divide the top by 3 and divide the bottom by 3. Well, 3 divided by 3 on the top is 1. 6 divided by 3 on the bottom is 2. And those don't have any other numbers in common. So it's going to be 1/2. For G, I'm going to do something similar. Looking for a number that both the top and the bottom have in common. I believe 2. So I'm going to divide the top and the bottom by 2. 8 divided by 2 is 4. 10 divided by 2 is 5. And 4 and 5 don't have anything in common. So I'm going to say that's my answer. Now this one you might think of a couple different numbers. I'm going to go and say the first thing I see is a 4. So I'm going to divide the top and the bottom by 4. 8 divided by 4 is 2. 16 divided by 4 is 4. But then I'm noticing that 2 and 4 also have a common factor of 2. So I'm just going to have to divide both top and bottom by 2. That's going to 2 divided by 2 is 1. 4 divided by 2 is 2. This one comes out to be 1/2. Now, we could have, maybe if we recognized at the beginning, if we would have started off with this 8 over 16, if we had divided the top and the bottom by 8, that would have gotten us to the 1/2 a little faster. But sometimes it's not always about fast, because I didn't necessarily recognize that 8 was a factor at first, so I did 4. Or you could have done 2 a few times and gotten to the same thing. So here I'm going to try part I. I see they both have a factor of 4, I believe, is the biggest one I can think of. 12 divided by 4 is 3. 16 divided by 4 is 4. 3 and 4 don't have any factors, so I'm going to, don't have any common factors, so I'm going to box that in. Now these are pretty much the same idea, and I'm not going to work through all of them just to save you a little bit of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simplify down the fraction part of that. So I'm going to divide the 4 by 4 and the 8 by 4. So this is going to come out to be 4 divided by 4 is 1, 8 divided by 4 is 2, so it's going to come out to be 4 and 1/2. Maybe one more, let's try this M. I think 8 is a factor of both of those. 16 divided by 8 is 2. 8 goes into 24 3 times. This is going to be 8. That's that big number. And 2/3. The other two are pretty similar to that. So let's look at this one here. It says, perform each indicated operation and reduce the results. So let's see. So 5 over 12 plus 5 over 12 is going to give me 10 over 12. But I can reduce that because they both have a factor of 2. So then this is going to be 10 divided by 2 is 5. 12 12 divided by 2 is 6. So it came out to be 10 over 12, and then I've reduced. For this next one, 3 minus 1 is 2. My denominators are the same, so 7 minus 1 is 6, so it's going to be 6/10. And I can reduce that 6 over 10, divide them both by 2. This is going to be 2 3/5. So next one here, and this is multiplying, so I'm going to multiply the top. 5 times 2 is 10. 8 times 3 is 24. I see that they both have a factor in common of 2. It's going to be 5 over 12. Now this last one is kind of similar as long as we remember what percents are talking about. It says, right, each percent is a reduced fraction. So remember, a percent means a number over 100. So 90% is the same thing as saying 90 divided by 100. You're going to want to go ahead and reduce the top and the bottom by 10, I believe. 90 divided by 10 is 9. 100 divided by 10 is 10. It's going to be 75 over 100. Want to reduce that. 25 goes into both of those. So this is going to give me 3 over 4. And one more just for good measure. It's going to be 5 over 100. Divide both the top and the bottom by 5. 1 over 20. Your homework is starts on page 105. You can do all of them from lessons 15, all of them lesson 14, and then 8 more of your choice.